The night was so bitterly cold that even the river seemed to draw in its breath. Paige Whitaker stood on her tiny apartment's balcony, staring at the faint glow of city lights blurring into the darkness beyond Mill River Park. She hadn't slept. Again. Insomnia came in like a tide lately, rolling her out of bed at odd hours, washing her thoughts in memories she tried to forget. That morning, just before dawn, the silence pressed too tight, so she bundled up and slipped into the street, letting her boots crunch along the frozen sidewalk, seeking the comfort of motion and the numbing chill of January in St. Paul. The park looked deserted, its swings stiff, the pond glazed in ice, trees bristling against the wind. Paige walked with her hands deep in her pockets, breath clouding before her, trying not to think. Just breathe, just keep going. That was when she saw it, a shape hunched near the river's metal fence, almost hidden in the snow and dark. For a moment, her mind played tricks, just a pile of trash maybe, or a bit of driftwood blown from the riverbank. Then the shape moved. Paige stopped, heart hammering, and squinted into the half-light. The figure shifted again, and she heard it. Soft, rasping, almost human in its pain. She approached slowly, her journalist's instincts overriding her fear. There, chained tight to the iron fence, stood a horse. Bigger than any she'd seen up close, a dark brown gelding trembling so hard his whole body shivered, steam rising from his bleeding sides, a battered halter cut into his face, metal chain biting cruelly at his legs, his eyes glazed with terror and exhaustion, found hers and held. She swallowed, blinking against the sting in her own eyes. The animal's breath plumed in the air, each exhale a desperate plea. Paige dropped to her knees, yanked off her coat, and draped it over his back, trying to cover his shaking body. Her fingers fumbled as she stroked his muzzle, whispering, "You're not alone, boy. I see you. I see you." He jerked back at first. Old scars showed white through the matted hair on his shoulder, a bullet of white fur standing out against the dark. There was an ID medallion on the halter, half buried in ice, and a crumpled piece of paper zip-tied to the ring. Paige's hands, numb with cold, managed to read it. Buckshot, SAR Unit 402. The code prickled at her memory. Search and rescue, police. And then, underneath, in jagged letters, "Do not return. Dangerous." Paige fished out her phone, fingers shaking, and dialed animal control. While the call rang, she kept whispering, watching the horse's eyes, glassy but refusing to close, refusing to surrender. His legs threatened to buckle, but his head stayed high, defiant. Every time a gust of wind rattled the fence, Buckshot tensed, ears flat, as if expecting a new blow. Paige pressed her hand to his cheek, grounding both of them in the freezing dark. "Please hurry," she begged into the phone. "He's bleeding. I think he's been left here all night. He's chained up. He's freezing to death." Somewhere beyond the fence, a shadow flickered. Paige's heart jerked in her chest. She looked up sharply. There, a sliver of movement by the tree line. Someone was watching. She could feel it, the hairs on her neck standing up, a prickle of threat crawling up her spine. The horse, too, sensed it. His nostrils flared, ears straining, muscles quivering in panic. Paige shifted, putting herself between the stranger and the animal. Her mind raced. Who would do this? Why here? Her own story as a reporter rushed back. Corruption, cover-ups, threats left on doorsteps. She shoved it down. This was different. This was now. The first responder, a young officer with tired eyes, arrived, flashlight sweeping. Paige flagged her down, voice shaking, explaining, until she realized her hands were bleeding too, frostbitten and raw from clawing at the chain. It took 3 people to cut Buckshot free. He tried to bolt, but collapsed, legs giving way. Paige held his head, whispering steady words, refusing to look away from those wide, wounded eyes. The officer examined the medallion, brows knitting. "This horse, he's from the police unit, isn't he? I heard something about a scandal, but—" She trailed off, glancing at the warning note. Buckshot snorted, hooves skittering in the snow. His will to survive was a palpable force. Rage, fear, pain all welded together. Paige refused to leave his side, even as the ambulance came for him, lights strobing in the dawn. She climbed into the truck beside him, ignoring the paramedics' protests. She could still feel that presence in the trees, watching. The city was waking up around them, but something stayed cold in Paige's chest, a sense that this was no accident, that whatever darkness had left Buckshot chained to die was far from finished. As the truck rumbled toward the emergency stable, Paige pressed her palm to the horse's neck, promising herself and him that she would not let this end in silence, that she would follow this story wherever it led, that neither of them would be alone, not anymore. Through the frosted glass, Paige saw her own reflection, a woman marked by fear, yes, but also by a stubborn, burning hope. The horse beside her, battered but unbeaten, mirrored that same wild fight. As the city faded behind them, Paige realized this was just the beginning, and neither of them would turn away, not now. The ambulance-turned animal transport screeched into the small emergency stable on the outskirts of St. Paul just as the sun cracked above the river, sending shards of pink and blue over the ice. Paige barely noticed the sunrise. She was too focused on the horse beside her, the way Buckshot's ribs shivered with each shallow breath, the blood crusted on his flanks, the way his eyes flickered from her face to every stranger in the room, searching for threats. Inside, the smell was sharp with antiseptic and hay. A veterinarian, Dr. Fiona Tran, a compact woman with crow's feet and a no-nonsense voice, rushed over as soon as the stable doors slammed shut. Her gloved hands were gentle, but her words snapped like wire. "He's hypothermic, and these wounds, these are no accident." Paige braced herself as Dr. Tran and her assistant slid Buckshot onto thick mats, towels steaming as they pressed against his icy hide. The halter came off with difficulty, revealing more damage. Deep rope burns ringed his neck, some old and pale, others angry and fresh. On his left shoulder, Paige could now see the white bullet-shaped patch, the hair around it clotted with blood. She reached out slowly, whispering, "Easy, Buckshot, easy." Even with the sedative the vet administered, Buckshot's fight didn't fade. Whenever a stranger approached, he tried to shield Paige, flattening his ears, swinging his hindquarters protectively, the muscles under his battered hide tensing as if to absorb the worst of what might come. Paige knelt beside him, holding his head and murmuring stories about books, the quiet of libraries, the gentle shuffle of pages, anything to ground them both. The staff clucked their tongues, shaking their heads at the injuries. Deliberate whip marks striped Buckshot's back and sides, angry red lines that told of more than neglect. "Somebody meant to break him," Dr. Tran muttered, dabbing ointment onto a gash near his haunch. "Or punish him for refusing." Paige's chest tightened. She kept one hand on Buckshot's muzzle, trying to ignore the guilt that rose in her. Why hadn't she gone to the park sooner? Why did the world do this, over and over, to the gentle and the voiceless? It was while removing the battered halter that Paige noticed something strange. The inner lining, thick with sweat and grime, seemed stiffer than it should. Her fingers found a rough patch stitched shut with black thread. Curiosity, a habit ingrained from her old life, overrode her hesitation. Carefully, she worked the stitches loose with a penknife from Dr. Tran's supply kit. A plastic flash drive, barely bigger than a fingernail, slipped out and fell into her palm. Paige stared, heart pounding. The drive was wrapped in faded tape, scrawled with 3 letters, SR. It was almost absurd, this tiny sliver of plastic against the storm of violence around them. But she knew, with a certainty that came from years of chasing buried truths, that this was no accident. Someone had hidden it here. Someone had intended for Buckshot to carry a secret. Dr. Tran glanced over, brow furrowing. "What's that?" "Evidence," Paige whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "Or a death sentence." She slid the drive into her pocket, mind racing. Should she call the police? Was it safe? The warning note still burned in her memory. Do not return. Dangerous. The wounds on Buckshot's legs required stitches. As Dr. Tran worked, she found the horse's microchip, intended for identification, had been smashed with a needle. Someone wanted him to disappear, like he never existed. The local news was already buzzing when Paige stepped outside to breathe. Reports had started surfacing about missing service animals, dogs, horses, even the odd therapy llama. Most were written off as runaways or simple theft. But this felt organized. Paige's reporter's brain started piecing it together. The city medallion, the warning, the hidden drive, the brutal wounds, and now the fact that Buckshot, identified as SR Unit 402, was tied to a police unit quietly disbanded under the stink of scandal. Back inside, Paige sat cross-legged on the straw near Buckshot's stall, waiting for the sedative to wear off. His legs kicked once, twice, as if running in a nightmare, then stilled. Paige ran her fingers over his ear, whispering comfort. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered, a gruff voice disguised by static. "You found him. Keep your head down, Paige. Walk away." The call ended. Paige's skin crawled. How did they know her name? Later that afternoon, when Buckshot finally struggled up, Paige brought a handful of hay and a bucket of warm water. He flinched but didn't refuse. For the first time, Paige saw something shift in his gaze. Not just fear, but a flicker of trust. She sat with him, heart heavy but resolute. She would not let this die in a forgotten file or a coroner's report. Not this time. That evening, Dr. Tran returned, pale-faced. "You need to see this." She'd found the flash drive. The files were encrypted, but one folder was open. Dozens of video clips showing brutal, illegal animal fights, horses forced to battle while men shouted bets. Paige's stomach twisted. Worse, there were scanned documents, payouts, city contracts, even a familiar name or two. At the top, a letterhead stamped with the emblem of St. Paul. A city official, someone Paige recognized from council meetings, was directly tied to the trafficking ring. Paige's world narrowed to a pinpoint of horror and resolve. She knew what came next. Denials, threats, attempts to bury the story. But Buckshot, bandaged and worn but standing in the straw beside her, was proof that the truth wouldn't stay buried. Not this time. As the evening news reported on growing concerns over missing service horses and allegations of corruption, Paige watched Buckshot drift into uneasy sleep, his battered body finally able to rest. She set her jaw, feeling the old fire of her reporting days rekindle. The city wasn't safe. Someone was still watching. But Paige had a story, and she had a survivor at her side. And outside, in the deepening night, She couldn't shake the sense that darkness still circled the barn, waiting for the next chance to strike. The city faded behind them, skyscrapers swallowed by bare trees and white fields, as Paige guided her borrowed truck along a snow-packed county road. In the trailer, buckshot shifted, hooves clattering softly. Each mile felt like a small act of rebellion, driving away from the web of threat and secrets into the uncertain promise of rural Minnesota. She kept glancing in the rearview mirror, heart thudding at every headlight that drew too close, but nobody followed. Paige's cousin, Claire, met her at the gate of a small farm that smelled of hay and wood smoke, miles from the city's noise. Claire's barn was old but solid, red paint peeling in the cold, a faded mural of wildflowers on its side. She'd said yes without hesitation when Paige called, voice tight with urgency but light on details. "You need a safe place? My barn's yours." They unloaded Buckshot in the pale afternoon. He was groggy, still favoring his left leg, but the crisp air seemed to revive him. Paige led him into a corner stall freshly lined with straw. He hesitated at the threshold, muscles taut, ears flicking at every creak and distant dog bark. Paige whispered, coaxing him inside. Only when she crouched down, making herself small, did Buckshot finally step over, blowing a warm breath that misted in the sunbeams cutting through the boards. Night came down hard, the kind of country dark that made Paige's old fears itch at the edges. Inside the barn, she set up a camp chair by Buckshot's stall, sleeping bag slung across her knees, a stack of battered books at her side. Insomnia lingered, so she read aloud, her voice shaky at first, then steady as Buckshot listened, sometimes flicking his ears, sometimes just standing quietly, eyes half closed. She read poetry, bits of old investigative notes, stories about wild horses that always found their way home. Paige's own nightmares were not so easily soothed. She'd wake in the middle of the night, gasping, heart pounding with images from that violent news assignment she couldn't escape. Shouts, blood, the sharp crack of a gun, the face of a source who'd paid too high a price. The barn's shadows pressed close, but she was not alone. Sometimes, as she trembled, she'd feel Buckshot's breath puff against her hand, grounding her in the present. In those small hours, a silent pact was forged. Paige tended Buckshot's wounds, changing dressings, cleaning his battered coat, speaking softly as she worked. He'd flinch at any sudden noise, a slamming door, a truck rumbling by. But each day he grew a little braver, letting Paige's hand linger on his neck, accepting carrots and apples from her palm. It was trust earned inch by inch, never asked for, always given quietly. Paige discovered new marks on Buckshot's back, old saddle scars, patches where the hair grew in silver gray, pressed deep into his skin. One morning, as she gently brushed away dried mud, she found a faded imprint, a police shield, the kind stamped onto saddles for search and rescue mounts. For a moment, Buckshot stood utterly still, eyes meeting hers, as if he understood what she'd found. Paige stroked his muzzle, whispering, "They tried to take everything from you, but not your heart." Life in the countryside settled into a rhythm. Paige made daily calls to the animal rescue team and checked in with Dr. Tran. The vet praised Buckshot's progress. His wounds were healing, his appetite growing. But trust, for both horse and woman, was slow to mend. Claire helped, bringing coffee in the mornings, letting Paige work alone when she needed silence. Sometimes she'd sit beside Paige in the straw, watching Buckshot nap, and say nothing for long stretches, just the sound of horses breathing, the wind humming against the barn siding. "Why'd they do it?" Claire asked one night, voice barely above the crickets. Why hurt him like that? Paige hesitated, then told her about the flash drive, the hidden videos, the official names that turned her stomach. She didn't mention the threats or the feeling of being watched. She couldn't bring that danger into Claire's home. But she said enough for Claire's face to go hard, her arms folded protectively across her chest. You're right to hide him. You both deserve better. The outside world seeped in, nonetheless. News reports about missing service horses multiplied. Paige heard rumors at the feed store, people whispering about animals vanishing, police turning a blind eye. Some nights, Paige would spot headlights far down the gravel road, too slow to be neighbors, too persistent to be accidents. She kept Buckshot in the barn, the doors barred, her phone always charged. But there were bright spots, too. Each day, Paige sat with Buckshot as he ate, read aloud as he drifted towards sleep, sometimes even dozed in the straw beside him. He'd nudge her shoulder if she dreamed too hard, as if to say, "Wake up, you're not alone." Paige felt her own anxiety shifting, the old scars loosening their grip. She was still afraid, but now she was afraid for both of them, a sharper, more purposeful fear. One evening, as dusk painted the fields blue, Paige reached out with a chunk of apple. Buckshot sniffed, then took it gently from her hand. It was the first time Paige smiled, eyes stinging, her heart cracking open a little more. In that quiet, in the low creak of the barn and the hush of wind through the rafters, something changed. She was still haunted by her past, still wrestling nightmares, but now she shared them with a horse whose own nightmares ran just as deep. And for the first time in months, Paige felt the faintest flicker of hope. Fragile, yes, but real. If Buckshot could learn to trust again, maybe so could she. By mid-February, the snow outside Claire's barn was layered in thick, silent drifts. Paige found herself waking each day with a different kind of alertness, a keener sense for things left unsaid, for phone calls that went quiet when she answered, for mail that arrived with corners already torn. Every time she walked from Claire's kitchen out to Buckshot's stall, she scanned the distant line of trees, checking for tire tracks or footprints that didn't belong. But Buckshot was healing, and each morning, Paige brushed the old scars along his neck and shoulder, talking in a steady voice about anything she could think of. Books, old films, what made a good story. His eyes had lost some of their glassy wildness. Now, when she entered the barn, he would lift his head, nostrils twitching, waiting for her presence as if it were a shield against whatever lingered in his memory. Yet something still gnawed at her. The flash drive, tucked inside an empty tea tin, weighed on her mind. Late at night, she'd sit by the wood stove, laptop open, rewatching the same encrypted files, pausing, rewinding, reading and rereading the few open documents that linked city contracts, the police department, and anonymous payments to a shell company. It was more than animal cruelty. It was a city-wide sickness. Paige began digging through public records, using skills from her reporting days. She traced the SR Unit 402 code from Buckshot's medallion to the official list of police search and rescue horses. The records abruptly ended 3 years earlier, with a string of vague transfer forms and missing notations. Most of the horses on the list had vanished, marked as sold, lost, or unaccounted for. She reached out, quietly, to people she could still trust. Among them was Ava Montes, a young city council aide whose older sister, Mia, had once worked as a mounted officer. When Paige called, Ava's voice was wary but curious. "You're the reporter who found that horse in the park, aren't you?" "I heard about him, and about other horses that never made it home." They met in a noisy coffee shop downtown. Paige described what she'd found: the wounds, the flash drive, the threats. Ava listened, lips pressed tight, then slid her phone across the table. My sister's horse, Ranger, went missing after a unit shuffle last year. Nobody would tell us anything. She filed reports, asked questions, nothing. Her voice broke just a hair. I want to help, but it's dangerous. There are people on the inside who don't want this story out. The next day, as Paige returned to Claire's, she found her truck tires slashed, the rubber peeled away in strips. She called Claire, hands shaking. Someone knows I'm here. They patched the tires in the cold, neither saying what they were thinking, both checking over their shoulders as dusk fell. That night, Buckshot paced his stall, muscles twitching at every sound. Paige stayed with him, reading by flashlight, hand on his neck. In the days that followed, Paige kept digging. She shared the flash drive's videos with Ava, who blanched at the violence but didn't look away. We need to get this to the right people, Ava said, though her fingers shook as she handled the laptop. But I don't know who to trust. Threats escalated. One morning, Paige found a note taped to the barn door. Some secrets aren't yours to tell. The words were printed, the paper soaked with something that smelled like gasoline. Claire called the sheriff, but the deputy who arrived seemed uninterested, barely glancing at the evidence. Probably just teenagers, he said, voice flat. This is the country. Folks pull pranks. But when he left, his eyes lingered on Buckshot too long for comfort. That afternoon, Paige's phone buzzed. A text, no name attached. Don't trust anyone. More horses are missing. They know you have the drive. Paige showed it to Ava, who paled. You have to be careful, Paige. They're watching. Yet, for all her nerves, Ava didn't back away. In fact, she came to the farm more often, bringing her laptop, city council files, coffee, and occasionally her little rescue dog, Pip, who curled up in the hay and barked at shadows. A fragile alliance formed, bound by fear and a stubborn refusal to let things go. They pieced together timelines, mapped missing horses, compared rumors. Claire cooked big pots of soup, saying little but always making sure no one walked to their car alone. In the barn, Paige's bond with Buckshot deepened. On restless nights, she'd slip out and find him watching the moon, ears twitching, eyes following her as if he knew exactly how hunted she felt. Once a storm rattled the doors and Buckshot startled, crashing against the stall wall. Paige slid inside, heart thumping, and stood quietly until he calmed, pressing her palm against the hard thump of his heart. In those hours, Paige's sense of isolation faded, replaced by a kind of shared vigilance. Buckshot was her shadow. She was his voice. Together they waited, nerves stretched tight, hope flickering in the dim barn light. One evening after Eva had gone and Claire was asleep, Paige sat cross-legged on the straw, scrolling through city payroll records on her phone. She nearly missed it. A payment disguised as special services, made to a shell account linked to a city official whose name was everywhere on the flash drive. Her pulse raced. She snapped a screenshot, heart hammering. As if in response, Buckshot pressed his head gently against her shoulder, anchoring her to the present, to warmth, to purpose. Paige let herself lean into him, her fear and anger mixing with gratitude. She knew the stakes were rising. Whoever was behind the ring was getting desperate, and Paige was running out of places to hide. But as she scratched Buckshot's jaw and looked into his steady gaze, she made a silent promise. She would not let them be silenced. Not now, not ever. Wind rattled the barn doors long after midnight, carrying with it the restless hush of a Minnesota winter. Paige sat in a pool of flashlight glow, her back pressed against Buckshot's stall, listening to the horse's steady breathing. She'd barely slept in days, mind caught between the growing mountain of evidence and the gnawing anxiety that every creak outside was someone coming to silence her. But there was no turning back. Tonight, she and Ava were about to cross a line. Ava arrived just after 1, headlights doused, bundled in her brother's old parka. She looked exhausted, hair tucked up beneath a wool cap, clutching a battered tote. "He agreed," Ava whispered, scanning the shadows. "He'll meet us here. Said he can't stand the guilt anymore." The whistleblower's name was Jared, a former stable hand for the police search and rescue unit, dismissed after the SAR scandal broke. Paige had heard whispers of him, but never expected he'd risk returning. They waited in nervous silence, the air sharp with anticipation. When Jared finally stepped into the barn, his shoulders hunched beneath layers, face half hidden by a scarf, Paige caught a glimpse of a man broken by fear and regret. His eyes darted to Buckshot, then back to the women. "I almost didn't come," he rasped. "But you have to understand what they did. What they made us do." Paige gestured for him to sit. Ava poured coffee into a chipped mug, hands trembling. Jared stared at it a long moment before finally taking a sip. The barn was cold, and the only sound for a while was Buckshot shifting, the horse's presence anchoring the moment with calm, quiet strength. Jared spoke in a low voice, every word heavy with the weight of years. It started with extra shifts, late-night calls, different trucks coming and going, city brass poking around the stables. At first, I thought it was just pressure, budget cuts, politics. But then horses started getting hurt. Some disappeared. Others came back with scars. They said we had to look the other way or lose our jobs. Ava's face tightened. Paige kept her voice gentle. "And Buckshot?" Jared looked at the horse, a shadow of pain flickering across his features. He was the only one who'd refuse, wouldn't go near the fighting rings, knew the difference between good and bad men. They tried to break him, but he always found a way out. The night before the unit disbanded, I helped sneak him out. Hid that flash drive in his halter. I thought someone would do the right thing. His voice broke. Instead, they found me. Fired. Threatened my family. For a moment, the three sat in heavy silence, broken only by Buckshot's low, reassuring snort. Then Jared reached into his coat, pulling out a thick, black hard drive and a battered file folder. "This is everything. Records, names, photos, copies of city contracts, vet bills, transfer forms. They killed 2 officers who tried to go public. There's more. Phone recordings, old text messages." He slid the pile across the hay to Paige. Buckshot stepped forward, lowering his head until his muzzle nearly brushed Jared's shoulder. Jared froze, then reached out, slow, careful, resting his palm on the horse's brow. It was a wordless gesture of forgiveness, acceptance, and grief. For the first time, Paige saw the lines of fear ease from Jared's face. "I'm sorry, boy," he whispered. "I'm so damn sorry." Ava's voice quivered. "Why now? Why risk it?" Jared's jaw clenched. "Because I can't keep running. I see them in my dreams, the horses, the officers. If I keep hiding, I'm no better than them." Paige pressed her fingers to the folder, feeling its weight. "This will bring them down, Jared. But you'll have to disappear. They're watching us. Maybe closer than we think." Jared nodded. "I have a plan. A friend in Wisconsin can help me vanish. But Paige, you have to be careful. The ringleader, the one at the top, he knows your name. He's been at the barn. I saw his car here 2 nights ago. A chill rippled through Paige. She exchanged a look with Ava. We'll make sure the right people get this. But you, stay safe. Don't answer unknown numbers. Don't go anywhere alone. For a few minutes, the world shrank to that drafty barn. 3 people, wounded, anxious, but resolved, and 1 battered horse, a living emblem of both survival and pain. Paige looked at Buckshot, then at Jared. You're not alone anymore. None of us are. Jared smiled for the first time, fleeting and small. You should know, there's a second flash drive. I left it at the old city stables, taped under the water trough. If anything happens to me, it's yours. After Jared left, vanishing into the snow, Ava and Paige pored over the evidence until dawn. Names leaped out. Officials Paige had shaken hands with at City Hall, business owners she'd once profiled, a web of payouts and cover-ups that stretched further than she'd feared. Ava finally slumped against the wall, face buried in her hands. This is huge. My sister, she'll know who to trust in law enforcement. We'll need protection. Witness protection maybe for Jared. Maybe for all of us. Paige nodded, exhaustion threading through her bones, but the resolve inside her sharper than ever. We don't let up. We don't back down. We finish what they started. Outside, morning light crept across the snow. Buckshot dozed in his stall, but every so often, one ear flicked toward the barn door, as if listening for trouble. Paige sat with him, running her fingers through his mane, grateful for the warmth of another living being beside her in the coming storm. She scrolled through her phone. New threats, new warnings, but now also new allies. She pressed the hard drive to her chest, swearing to herself and to Buckshot. We don't run, not anymore. We fight, for every voice they tried to silence. And somewhere, in the brittle quiet of dawn, Paige felt a sliver of courage rise up. Their enemy was real, the threat was closing in, but so was the truth, and she was not alone. A fresh snowstorm rolled in that evening, draping Claire's farm in white silence. But inside the barn, nerves were as taut as wire. Paige couldn't stop checking the locks or peering out the window for headlights. Every wind gust against the door felt like a warning. Ava returned just after dusk with a tight smile and the look of someone trying to hold their breath. I got word to Mia, she whispered. She's on duty tonight. She'll keep her radio close. Jared arrived as promised, pale and hollow-eyed but clutching his phone, ready to record anything. Claire, who'd always seemed unshakable, stayed in the house with a bat by the door, promising to call for help if anything felt off. Paige paced between Buckshot's stall and the barn door, her hands cold and restless. Buckshot watched her every move, ears flicking at distant noises, muscles coiled, never more than a few feet from her side. The first sign of trouble came just after 10, a pair of headlights creeping down the long, icy driveway, engine idling at the gate. Paige's heart hammered. She killed the barn lights and crouched behind a stack of hay, motioning Ava and Jared to follow. Through the crack in the barn wall, she saw 2 men climb from the car, bulky figures in heavy coats and knit caps, one carrying a crowbar, the other something darker slung at his side. They moved with practiced caution, scanning the shadows, muttering to each other in low voices. Paige barely breathed. She watched as they circled the barn, rapping on the boards, testing the doors. Buckshot's body went rigid, his head high, muscles tense, ready for flight, but also for a fight he wouldn't abandon. Inside, the tension was electric. Ava clutched her phone, already dialing 911 with trembling hands. Jared steadied his phone, quietly pressing record as the men's boots crunched in the snow outside. Suddenly, the men hammered at the side door, rattling it so hard the hinges groaned. "Open up! We know you're in there! Give us the horse and nobody gets hurt!" The words rang out, brutal and direct. Paige swallowed her fear and pressed herself against the stall, hand on Buckshot's neck, feeling his heart pound beneath his coat. The men tried calling to Buckshot by old commands, sharp words, whistles, even a name from his days in the police unit. Buckshot pinned his ears and stood his ground, body between Paige and the door, unmoving. The men grew angrier, banging louder, cursing. "Don't make us come in there! Last chance!" Ava's voice was barely a whisper. "Mia's on her way. She said backup's close." Jared angled his phone to catch the faces at the window, risking a quick shot with the flash off. The barn seemed to shrink around them, the air so tight it nearly hurt to breathe. Just as one of the men pried the lock, Claire's floodlights flared to life, bathing the barn in blinding white. A siren's wail echoed up the drive. The men froze, startled, then scrambled for their car. But before they could make it, two cruisers roared up, lights strobing blue and red. Officers leapt out, weapons drawn, blocking the escape. One of the officers was Mia Montes, tall, steady, her badge glinting as she ordered the men to the ground. The barn door flew open and police poured in. Paige threw her arms around Buckshot's neck, dizzy with relief. The men outside were quickly cuffed and loaded into cruisers, shouting threats and curses all the while. Mia ducked inside, eyes scanning the scene, then hugged her sister hard. "You did it, Ava. You both did." Jared handed over his recordings, shaking so badly Paige helped steady his arm. "You have to keep going," he stammered. "There's more out there. They won't stop with these two." The officers swept the barn, taking statements, checking on everyone. Buckshot let Mia stroke his neck just for a moment, before turning back to Paige, never letting her out of his sight. The solidarity between human and horse was palpable, a silent message of resistance. Mia leaned in, her voice pitched low. "I'll take the evidence straight to the right people. The chief's on our side, quietly. This will break soon, but you need to stay somewhere safe tonight. Both of you." As the chaos faded and the barn quieted, Paige sat with Buckshot, stroking the old scars along his shoulder, whispering thanks. Outside, snow swirled in the moonlight, covering up the boot prints, the tire tracks, the darkness that had tried so hard to break in. But inside, a different kind of warmth grew, a bond tested and made stronger, a truth no longer held in secret. Ava wrapped herself in a blanket, exhaustion and relief warring in her eyes. "We're still standing," she murmured. Jared paced the barn, glancing out every window, but for the first time his expression showed hope, not just fear. When Paige finally laid down in the straw beside Buckshot, she let the exhaustion wash over her. The fight wasn't finished, not by a long shot. But tonight, they'd won something precious. They'd held the line. They'd refused to let cruelty, corruption, and fear have the final word. As sleep claimed her, Paige dreamed not of violence, but of a brown horse running free in the snow, unchained and wild beneath a sky bright with stars. By dawn, the farm looked almost peaceful, sunlight glinting off icicles, snow blanketing every fence post and rooftop. But inside the house, the mood was taut as wire. Paige had barely finished a cup of black coffee when Ava burst through the kitchen door, her phone in hand, face pale. "Mia says we can't wait. Someone tipped off the papers. There's chatter about a leak, and a city official is trying to bury the evidence. If we don't get it to the feds today, it's gone for good." Paige's stomach clenched. She knew the playbook: stall, intimidate, destroy. They'd already seen how fast the ring could move, how quickly threats became violence. She glanced at Buckshot, grazing in the snowy paddock outside, his breath fogging in the morning air, every movement alert. Jared was pacing by the window, eyes flicking between the driveway and his phone. "You're right," he muttered. "We have to go. I'll drive back up. The roads are bad, but we'll take the back way. Less chance of being spotted." Claire handed Paige a thermos, voice trembling. "You come back safe, both of you." They loaded the hard drives, files, and backup flash drive into a weathered backpack. Paige zipped her parka, shivering despite the layers, and grabbed Buckshot's lead. The gelding watched her with steady, intelligent eyes, as if he knew this wasn't just a ride. This was the final stretch. As they saddled up, snowflakes began to drift again, slow at first, then swirling faster. Paige settled into the saddle, legs shaking, and leaned forward to whisper, "We've come this far, partner. I need you just a little longer." Buckshot snorted, stomping his hooves, muscles bunching beneath her. Jared climbed into the old pickup behind them, Ova riding shotgun, both phones open to 911 just in case. The storm rolled in as they entered the woods. A wild, blinding squall, thick flakes swirling so fast Paige could barely see the trail ahead. Trees loomed out of the white, shadows flickering in the corners of her vision. Every nerve was alert. Somewhere behind, a car engine revved, too close, too loud for a rural morning. Paige urged Buckshot into a trot, heart pounding. Half a mile in, headlights bobbed behind them, gaining. Someone was following, slipping and fishtailing on the icy ruts. Paige pressed low, whispering encouragement into Buckshot's mane. The horse, despite his wounds and the cold, surged forward, hooves breaking a new trail, never faltering. Every time a branch cracked or a distant shout echoed, Buckshot's ears flicked, but he pressed on, trusting Paige, trusting the path. Jared's voice crackled over the walkie. "Paige, they're behind us. Blue truck, no plates, 2 guys, can't see their faces. Keep moving." Paige scanned the trees for an escape. An old logging path, a ditch, any way to lose their tail. Buckshot hesitated at a fallen log, then vaulted it with surprising power. Paige clung to his mane, gasping as the snow stung her cheeks. She could hear the truck crashing through the brush, headlights sweeping back and forth. Ava's voice, "We're calling it in. Mia's en route. Hang on." The next stretch of woods narrowed to a tunnel, darkness pressing close. Paige's breath fogged, mingling with Buckshot's, both of them running on instinct now. The truck behind them skidded to a stop, doors slamming. Men shouted, threats, orders, then the crack of footsteps over crusted snow. Paige's mind raced. She gripped the backpack tight and swung down from Buckshot. "Go," she hissed, slapping his flank. Buckshot circled back, blocking her from the 2 men who charged from the trees. Paige's pulse hammered. One man lunged, grabbing for the backpack. Buckshot reared, teeth bared, hooves slicing the air. The man staggered back, cursing, and the second swung a branch at Buckshot's head. The world slowed to a pinpoint. Paige threw herself between them, feeling the icy sting of the branch across her arm. Buckshot pressed forward, blocking her body with his own, taking a blow to his shoulder, his battered, scarred shoulder. Yet he did not yield. Then sirens split the woods. Red and blue lights flashed through the trees. Maya's voice boomed from a bullhorn. "Step away! Hands where I can see them!" The attackers scattered, crashing through the undergrowth. Officers swarmed in, guns drawn. Paige slumped to her knees, arms around Buckshot's neck, relief and adrenaline making her sob. Jared skidded into view, Ava close behind, both shouting her name. Mia took charge, gathering the evidence, radioing for ambulances, and barking orders. She knelt beside Paige, voice gentle. "You did it. You held on. It's over." But Paige shook her head, heart still racing. "It's not over until he's safe, until it's all out there." Within the hour, the evidence was delivered. Flash drives, hard drives, files, placed directly into the hands of a federal investigator who'd been quietly watching the city for months. Statements were taken, videos uploaded, the trafficking ring's secrets now impossible to bury. Word spread fast. Arrests, suspensions, City Hall thrown into chaos. As the snowstorm faded, Paige stood with buckshot in the woods, watching officers lead away the men who had tried to end this story in blood and silence. Buckshot was trembling, but when Paige looked into his eyes, she saw not fear, but fierce, unbroken loyalty. She leaned against him, whispering gratitude, promises, and pride. "You saved me, Buckshot. You saved so much more than you'll ever know." And as sirens faded into distance and the woods grew still, Paige knew, whatever waited in the aftermath, they had crossed through the storm. Together, they had made it to the other side. Sunrise over St. Paul brought a strange quiet, as if the city itself was holding its breath. But for the first time in months, Paige felt the weight on her chest begin to lift. Word had spread with wildfire speed. Evidence against the trafficking ring was now public, the videos impossible to scrub from the internet. On every news channel, anchors spoke of corruption, cruelty, and the heroes who'd risked everything to bring the truth to light. At Claire's farm, the sense of siege had broken. Police cars no longer prowled the end of the lane. Instead, news vans idled in the snow, reporters hoping for a glimpse of Buckshot, or the women who had toppled a city secret. Claire fielded calls from old friends, some congratulatory, some simply in awe that a quiet family farm had become the epicenter of a reckoning. But Paige's mind was on the families, the horses, the scars left behind. She stood with Buckshot in the winter paddock, his wounds now healing, the harsh lines of pain softening in his eyes. He wore a new halter, soft leather, not metal, and a red blanket against the cold. Children from the town gathered along the fence, faces pressed between rails, hands outstretched to offer apples or whispers of thanks. Later that afternoon, the community gathered in Mill River Park for a candlelight vigil. It was Ava's idea, and Paige immediately said yes. Together, they arranged for families of lost or rescued horses to come. People who had thought their stories would never be heard, who had been shamed into silence. The park, once a place of secrets and shadows, became a ground of remembrance and hope. Rows of candles flickered against the snow, each flame a small act of defiance. Ava stood before the crowd, her voice trembling but clear, recounting how her sister's horse, Ranger, had disappeared and how the city turned its back. Mia, now in her dress uniform, stood beside her, newly promoted and still raw with emotion. "This is about more than animals," Mia told the crowd. "This is about every person who refused to look away, about every survivor, two-legged and four-legged, who fought to be heard." Paige lingered at the edge, not used to the attention, but people kept coming, thanking her, sharing stories of animals lost and found, of cruelty endured and kindness discovered in unlikely places. She listened, eyes shining with a grief and gratitude too tangled for words. Jared, granted immediate witness protection, stood nearby, nervous but relieved. For the first time in years, he wasn't hiding. He was talking with families, with investigators, with other stable hands who'd come forward since the news broke. Paige watched as Buckshot pressed his nose gently into Jared's shoulder, forgiveness passing between them in a hush deeper than words. The vigil became a rally. Signs were raised, petitions signed, news crews recording every promise from city officials to never again allow such abuse in our community. By week's end, the city council passed new laws, tougher protections for service horses, mandatory audits, criminal charges for those involved in the trafficking ring. The mayor's office, once indifferent, now hung banners across City Hall: "No more silence, justice for the voiceless." Amid all the noise and celebration, Paige was offered her old reporting job back, now that her name was splashed across every headline as a hero. But she turned it down. Instead, she announced plans to stay in St. Paul and continue working as an advocate for animal welfare, launching educational programs, organizing rescues, using her voice for those still unheard. Buckshot became a city symbol, his image painted on walls, shared in classrooms, the story of his survival recounted at every community meeting. When Paige led him through Mill River Park at the vigil's close, children swarmed to touch his nose, to listen to his story. For the first time, Buckshot did not shy away. He stood quietly, eyes soft, accepting every gentle hand and kind word. To the community, he was more than a survivor. He was proof that wounds could heal and that scars could become badges of courage. Ava's sister was honored at City Hall, promoted to head of the new Animal Welfare Task Force. Jared, his name cleared, was granted a new start far from the city. Ava herself became a local hero, her quiet tenacity inspiring young activists and council members alike. For Paige, it was a quiet kind of victory. She kept a low profile but felt the ripples everywhere. Families who now spoke openly about loss, children who learned that justice was possible. The faint but real shift in the city's mood. At home, she still struggled with insomnia and old fears, but each time she walked out to the barn, Buckshot was there. Steadier, stronger, greeting her with a low nicker and an unwavering gaze. One evening, as winter loosened its grip, Paige stood at the edge of the field, watching Buckshot graze. She pulled her journal from her coat pocket, writing in blocky, determined script. "We fought for the voiceless and for the silenced. We turned scars into stories. We are not alone, not now, not ever." As dusk settled, the city's lights blinked on, and the park was filled with laughter, music, the sound of horses' hooves. Paige realized healing, real healing, was never instant. It was 1,000 small acts, a vigil, a handshake, a story told, a scar accepted. Buckshot, once marked for silence, was now the heart of a city learning to listen. Paige, once haunted by nightmares, was finally letting in the light. Spring took its time coming to Minnesota that year. The snow melted in reluctant patches, the air still sharp in the morning. But with every sunrise, the world felt a little lighter. Paige often stood at the paddock fence, watching Buckshot doze in the slanting gold of early light, his scars fading but never vanishing. Their world was changed, but not perfect. The aftermath of truth-telling always left strange echoes, some hopeful, some raw. In the months that followed the reckoning, Paige, Ava, and Jared made a quiet vow. They would not let the story end at the headlines. At first, their days were consumed with interviews, legal follow-ups, and meetings with city officials. But soon, they shifted their focus, channeling public energy into something lasting. They founded a small nonprofit, Voices for the Voiceless, dedicated to animal rescue, public education, and survivor support for both humans and animals affected by abuse. Every weekend, Paige and Ava hosted workshops in a bright room at the city library, inviting families, veterans, and school groups. There were art projects, lectures on animal care, and guest talks from veterinarians and law enforcement. At every event, Buckshot was the star guest, now working as a therapy horse, calm and patient, helping children and veterans who struggled with fear, anxiety, or the weight of invisible wounds. One Saturday, a boy named Caleb, a foster kid with skittish eyes and a stutter, stood frozen beside Buckshot, unable to raise his hand for the soft brush Paige offered. Buckshot waited, unblinking, until Caleb finally reached out. The moment his hand touched Buckshot's neck, the tension in his body melted. Caleb's eyes brightened, and for the first time in weeks, his laughter rang through the room. Paige saw it over and over. Buckshot's silent strength coaxing people into trust, into hope, into believing healing was possible. Paige herself had begun to write again, filling notebooks with reflections on trauma and recovery. Some mornings, she'd find herself at her old typewriter in Claire's kitchen, pages scattering across the table, her thoughts slower but deeper than before. She wrote about the things she'd never said out loud, how courage was not loud or showy, but quiet and steady, how the bravest acts were sometimes choosing to stay, to listen, to keep loving in the face of loss. She wrote in her journal one night, "We heal not by forgetting pain, but by sharing our scars with those who understand. There's no going back, only going forward, one hesitant, hopeful step at a time." Ava was thriving too, taking on more responsibility with the city council and championing new legislation for animal welfare. She and Paige became known for their passionate, sometimes stubborn advocacy, and their friendship deepened, bonded by ordeal and by the knowledge that they'd pulled each other, and so many others, back from the brink. Jared, once a ghost in his own life, was learning to speak without flinching. His testimony had helped bring down the ring, and, through the nonprofit, he now trained others in animal care and ethical rescue practices. The community that had once turned away from him now shook his hand, brought him hot coffee, included him in backyard picnics. Forgiveness was never a straight path, but Jared was walking it with quiet determination. For Paige, the most profound change was internal. Nightmares still crept in, but less often. When they did, she would slip outside, walk to the barn, and find Buckshot waiting. She'd press her forehead to his, breathing in his earthy scent, letting his calmness anchor her. Sometimes she'd read to him from her journals, her words tumbling out into the straw and dusk. One warm evening, as a group of local veterans gathered for a therapy session, Paige watched as Buckshot nuzzled a young woman who hadn't spoken in days. The woman began to weep, not from fear or shame, but from relief, from being seen. Paige felt her own tears rise, and she let them come, not embarrassed, but grateful. During a panel on animal rescue, a reporter asked Paige what she'd learned from Buckshot. She answered without hesitation, her voice steady and low. "Real courage means standing up for those who can't speak. It's about doing the right thing, even when it's not easy or safe. And it's about understanding that a single act of compassion can ripple outward, changing laws, saving lives, healing wounds we thought would never close." The city felt different now, more alert, more watchful, more willing to stand up for the vulnerable. Memorials to lost service animals appeared in parks and at police stations. Art students painted Buckshot's image on a mural downtown, a horse standing tall, eyes wise and clear, surrounded by a crowd of people and children, their faces turned toward the light. At home, Paige started new routines. She gardened with Claire in the thawing soil, let herself laugh when Ava teased her, watched old movies with Jared. She found, in the rhythm of days, that healing was not a finish line but a process. Slow, imperfect, a constant choosing of hope over despair. On the anniversary of Buckshot's rescue, the nonprofit hosted a celebration. Dozens gathered at Mill River Park. Families, children, city officials, survivors. Buckshot led a gentle parade, ribbons braided in his mane, his presence a living reminder that broken things could be made strong again. Paige walked beside him, no longer hiding, no longer haunted. She was still herself, scarred, yes, but open. The city was watching, and this time, it was with pride. As the sun set, Paige found a quiet moment beneath a budding oak tree. She pressed her hand to Buckshot's shoulder and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me." Buckshot turned, nudged her gently, and Paige knew. The lesson was as simple as it was profound. Healing was possible, always, if they faced the truth, together. A full year had passed since that bitter winter dawn at Mill River Park. The seasons had swept through Paige's life like a healing wind, first fierce, then softening, finally ushering in a spring so lush it almost felt like grace. Green unfurled across the city and the countryside, wildflowers bursting from the cracks in sidewalks and blanketing the rolling fields around Claire's farm. Even the river seemed changed. No longer a border of fear, but a ribbon of light winding through a community reborn. The annual parade of rescue was the city's new tradition, and this year Buckshot led the way. His coat gleamed in the sunlight, his old scars hidden beneath the healthy shine, but Paige knew they were there, a map of everything he'd endured and survived. She walked at his side, one hand resting on his sturdy neck, her other holding the lead rope loose and easy. All along Mill River Park, crowds cheered and waved. Some children held up signs, "Thank you, Buckshot." Others waved tiny flags shaped like horseshoes or wore homemade badges with the word "Hope" in bold crayon. Behind Buckshot trailed a procession of rescued horses, dogs, and volunteers, each with a story, each now celebrated instead of shamed. Ava rode beside them, laughing with the children and sharing updates on new city animal programs. Mia, beaming in her dress uniform, led a mounted unit dedicated solely to rescue and rehabilitation. And Jared, more at home in a crowd than ever before, walked with a group of kids, teaching them how to gently offer treats and speak softly to the nervous animals. As they neared the center of the park, Paige's eyes caught on a new addition, a bronze plaque set in stone at the edge of the gathering. Its inscription read, "To those who never gave up, their courage saved us all." Families gathered around, many in tears, some clutching photos of lost horses, some simply closing their eyes and listening to the gentle hush of hooves and laughter. Paige recognized familiar faces, former officers, city council members, the librarian who'd always set aside animal care books for her. She felt the quiet current of community run through the crowd, connecting them all through pain, loss, and now, hard-earned hope. At the edge of the field, a group of children clustered around Buckshot, reaching up with open hands and wide eyes. He lowered his head, blowing softly as they stroked his nose, whispered secrets into his patient ears. One little girl pressed a drawing of a horse with a shining white spot on its shoulder into Paige's hand. "He's my hero," the girl said. Paige knelt, her eyes stinging, and wrapped the girl in a gentle hug. As the sun climbed higher, the parade turned into a celebration. There were tables loaded with food, banners flapping in the breeze, music floating from a bandstand. Paige and Ava gave short speeches, not about themselves, but about the hundreds who had come together to make the city safer for its animals, about the power of truth spoken aloud, and the small, daily acts of bravery that add up to something unstoppable. Paige's own words caught in her throat as she looked at Buckshot, now dozing in the grass, a cluster of children resting against his side. Justice, she said, begins with empathy. True change starts when even one person refuses to turn away. The scars we bear aren't marks of shame. They're proof of what we survived, and of the hope we can offer to others. The crowd fell silent, the moment thick with meaning. For a heartbeat, Paige remembered all the nights she'd stood in darkness, uncertain if healing was even possible. Now she stood in sunlight, surrounded by the living proof that it was. Later, as the celebration ebbed and people drifted away, Paige walked buckshot down to the river. The city skyline shimmered in the distance, children's laughter echoing behind them. She slipped off his halter and watched as he grazed, content and free, along the bank. Birds sang in the willows, and the water caught the sky in its gentle ripple. She sat in the grass, pulling out her journal, and wrote the words she'd been searching for all year. The story doesn't end with rescue. It begins with it. We're all survivors here, wounded, yes, but awake, alive, ready to turn scars into new beginnings. Paige closed her eyes, felt the sun on her face, and let herself believe in the ordinary magic of peace. Buckshot wandered over, nuzzled her shoulder, and for a long, quiet moment, neither moved. Around them, the world kept turning, messy, beautiful, full of unfinished stories. When the time came to head home, Paige led Buckshot through the gate, both of them moving with a new kind of ease. At the entrance to the park, the bronze plaque gleamed in the afternoon sun, a permanent reminder to anyone who passed by. Hope is a choice, courage is a promise, and no one heals alone. As they walked back into the life they'd remade, Paige knew there would be challenges ahead. But now every step was taken in company, hers, Buckshot's, and the city that had finally learned to listen. And so, under a sky wide with spring and possibility, Paige and Buckshot began the next chapter, one filled with compassion, with hard-won joy, and with the quiet certainty that, together, they could face whatever came next.